You're listening to the Bears Barroom Radio Network, and the following program is suitable for all audiences.
Paxton for three! Yeah! Yeah!
In 1993, when Chicago Bulls guard John Paxson sunk the series-winning shot in Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Mark Schanowski was there reporting. In 1988, when Michael Jordan beat Dominique Wilkins in what is considered the greatest, most controversial slam dunk duel of all time, David Schuster was there reporting.
What kind of expectations do you set for yourself individually going into year 3?
In 2010, when Derrick Rose said,
"Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league? I don't see why. Why can't I do that?"
It was Mark Schanowski who asked the question.
It is my distinct honor to present the 2010-2011 NBA Most Valuable Player Award to Derrick Rose of the Chicago Bulls.
In 2011, when Rose accepted the Most Valuable Player Award to become the youngest MVP in the history of the league, David Schuster was there reporting. Schanowski, Schuster, two of Chicago's most accomplished NBA reporters. This is Sharpshooters.
And welcome into the latest edition of the Sharpshooters. I'm David Schuster, and he, of course, is Mr. Mark Schanowski. And Mark, we should tell everyone that we'll be joined very shortly by our good friend Will Perdue. You can follow him on Twitter, of course, at Will_Perdue32. And I know Will is very expansive in his thoughts all the time, so we'll look forward to hearing from him. But we have to start in the bubble, Mark. And you know what? It keeps getting better and better for me. I mean, the games are really, really good. We'll start in the East because that series, as we record this on Monday afternoon, is 2-1 in favor of Miami. Big win by Boston, because if they didn't win Game 3, who knows what would have happened in this series. But I think it's still ultimately going to go to 7 games.
Yeah, how about Gordon Hayward playing 31 minutes? I mean, Brad Stevens saw them let 2 games slip away, the first 2 games of the Eastern Conference Finals, and he's like, forget this easing him into it. You know, we need him out there. And Gordon Hayward played really well. I thought he contributed. He played well on both ends of the court, hit some big shots for him, and I think he's going to be a factor in this series. But when you look at the first 2 games, they blew a 14-point lead in Game 1, a 17-point lead in Game 2, wind up losing the game in overtime, and guys are screaming and yelling at each other in the locker room.
I love that, by the way.
Yeah, you know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Competitive spirit.
And I think that's one of the things that, because of this bubble environment, the quarantine, now they do have their families and you know, guys have their girlfriends or whatever, but you know, I think that a lot of these guys are just so cooped up and just being in that same environment for so long that naturally when there's frustration on the basketball court, I think it's almost multiplied times 10, because, you know, guys are just out of their routines and being stuck in a situation where they don't really have that outlet to get away from their teammates or get away from the game. And it's not surprising that spilled over in the Boston locker room, but to their credit, they used it as a positive thing. They came back and won Game 3.
In that second game, it was interesting. You know, down the stretch, they took turns going on runs in that game. I mean, Boston was down, I think, about 9 points, and then they went on an extended run, and they think they had a 5 or 6 point lead or something like that, and then Miami had the last run in them. There was a really, really nice play by Jimmy Butler, where he was going out of bounds, and he put the ball behind his back. I think it was with his left hand, which makes it even more amazing. You got to be really strong to do something like that, and he threw it over to his teammate at half court, and ultimately he got the jam as the pass came back to him. That was a great play.
He did get a little bit lucky on the pass. I think he knew the general area where his teammate was, but as you mentioned, he's flying out of bounds with his left hand behind the back, and it turned out to be a perfect dime. Yeah. Hit him right in stride, and then he came back on the court and got the basket. He had a big 3-point shot from the corner, and then he went in and got a 3-point play, just overpowering the defender. And, you know, we've talked a lot about Jimmy over the last couple of weeks, so, you know, I don't want to make this another homage to Jimmy Butler because, you know, he didn't play that great in Game 3.
No, he didn't.
Jimmy Butler is a hardworking guy who has matured and grown to the point where the Miami Heat players, I think they really love the guy, especially the young players, because of his all-in mentality, because he's willing to work 24/7 on improving his game. And I think the young guys have taken his lead with the Heat, and that's why guys like Bam Adebayo, who, when he came out of Kentucky, we didn't really know who he was. He had a so-so rookie year, and all of a sudden he's an all-star, and he's a big difference maker. I mean, that block he had to protect the rim. I mean, his wrist almost in the cylinder. Actually, it was in the cylinder, and he was able to push it back. I mean, tremendous strength. Saved the game there. That was one of the best defensive plays that we've been watching basketball for a long time. That's a top 10 defensive play probably ever in the playoffs.
All right, so I don't know ultimately what's going to happen in this series. Right now, as I said, as we record this on Monday afternoon, it's 2-1 in favor of Miami. I'm still going to predict 7 games, and I'm still going to predict it's going to go down to a last-second shot in Game 7.
Sure could.
And speaking of last-second shots, let's go over to the West. And Mark, I haven't been right about too many things in this bubble so far, but I am going to be right. The Lakers are going to win this whole thing because they have I keep saying 2 of the best 5 players in the world. I'm going to actually shorten it. I think they have 2 of the best 3 players in the world right now.
With Kevin Durant currently sidelined,
yes.
I think, you could say that. And
Giannis is the other person in the equation.
And I think Anthony Davis, because he labored all those years in New Orleans on bad teams, and he was hurt a lot, and people wondered, how good is this guy? Sure, he's got all the measurables, and he scores a lot of points, he grabs a lot of rebounds, but, his teams in New Orleans really weren't winning that well. He never really got on the playoff showcase, and a lot, there's a lot of guys in the league that have empty stats, and people were thinking, is Anthony Davis one of those guys? Well, it turns out, no, not at all. I mean, he was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. He's done a really good job throughout the playoffs, protecting the paint, getting out on switches, doing everything that you would want from a modern-day big man, and just the way he stepped up with confidence on that last shot. There was no hesitation at all. Obviously, there's only 2 seconds left in the game, but you knew that he felt really good about taking that shot, that he was going to knock it down.
Terrible defense, by the way.
Well, I mentioned on Twitter, and I got the name wrong. I apologize to Miles Plumlee because he was nowhere near the bubble, but his brother Mason really screwed that up. I mean, and I love the fact that just about any network show you turn on afterwards, they killed him, and rightly so. I mean, Charles Barkley kept saying over, what are you thinking? What are you doing, Plumlee? Because LeBron James was involved in that play, but he didn't even set a screen.
No, he just stood there.
They made the point on Inside the NBA that it was almost like LeBron was magnetized, like Plumlee ran right into him, and then without communicating, he kind of makes a gesture to Jeremy Grant, like, well, you got to get out on him. I mean, we've all played pickup games where a guy just doesn't want to make the effort on defense, and they just substituted Plumlee in to play defense, and yet, he's in a trail position. LeBron's just standing there. He's not setting the screen.
No.
And he just ran into him. Now, I don't know what was said. Well, there couldn't have been. There was no timeout before that. So that was just basketball IQ. And he did not stay with his man. He gets stuck on the screen, expects Jeremy Grant to read his mind and go out on a switch. And to Jokic's credit, he was guarding the baseline. He was jumping up and down and kicking his legs and everything else. He quickly reversed course and did get a late contest on AD, but it was too late. By the time he had a clean look.
All right, I don't know what the equivalent in basketball is for when they call a baseball player a 5-tool player. It means he can do everything. Anthony Davis is a 5-tool NBA player, basketball player, and I can remember the first time. I didn't watch him, obviously, as he was growing up, and he was one of those guys who was 6 feet when he came into high school, and he was 6'10" when he graduated.
Yeah, he played guard when he started out at Perspective.
So he has all the tools of being, an all-around player, and then he went to Kentucky, and, in the Kentucky, days of those days, there had so many stars there. I think he averaged 14 points in his 1 year at Kentucky, and then he came into the pros. And I saw him really for the first time in person at the United Center. They had, it was one of the traveling U.S. teams. I don't know if it was for the Olympics or for the FIBA tournament. And Anthony Davis played in that game, and he was by far the best player on the court. And I thought, oh my God, this guy is fantastic. And sure enough, that's exactly what it is. And like I said, with him and LeBron, you have two of the 3 best players in the world. Yes, the Lakers do have some deficiencies here or there, but boy, when you have those 2 great players, it makes up for so many other things.
Yeah, and one of the criticisms of LeBron is that he's always gone out of his way to try to play GM and stack the deck in his favor. Of course, his old high school buddy Paul is, the agent for both LeBron and AD, and he's become a big mover and shaker in terms of the agent industry and getting a lot of big name clients. And people looked at that trade last year and saying, "Oh, they gave up Brandon Ingram and Josh Hart and who was the third player in that? Ball, Lonzo Ball." So 3 players, multiple draft picks. They got fleeced. No. Talent, superstar talent wins, and especially in LeBron's situation, he's now 35. He knows he's got maybe 3 more really good chances to win titles and try to catch up to Michael. He wanted a veteran who could help him win, and he identified Anthony Davis. Credit to the Lakers organization for being willing to pay that price. But let's face it, everywhere LeBron's been, he went to Miami, with the Super Friends. They won 2 titles there. He goes back to Cleveland, arranges a trade for Wiggins for Kevin Love. They win another title there, and then he goes out to L.A., misses the playoffs last year, mostly because he got hurt, which was a rarity in his career. And he just said, "I'm not coming back with this group." And they went out and they got Anthony Davis. And I know that Bulls fans are so frustrated. Here's a kid from Chicago. Why couldn't the Bulls have gone out and tried to make a trade for Anthony Davis? But after his experience with mediocre to bad teams with the Pelicans, he didn't want to come to Chicago and play on a rebuilding team. So that was never a realistic possibility. LeBron is almost as good a GM as he is a player.
Yeah. Speaking of LeBron, he finishes second in the MVP voting, and he's pissed off about it.
Cry me a river.
Yeah, well, that's, unfortunately, he's so talented in so many areas, but he does cry a lot also.
He's one of the worst whiners in the league. I mean, he complains about every call, and, he's right in terms of it should not have been that lopsided. But
I will agree there.
It's not like all these voters get together in a room and they say,
Let's screw LeBron.
Giannis should probably get 55% of the votes, so let's arrange it that way.
No.
I mean, everybody's sitting at home and doing their ballot just, from what they can see from statistically in the games that they watch throughout the season. There was no conspiracy to make LeBron look that much inferior to Giannis. That's just the way it turned out. And, that's just been one of the things that has kind of rubbed people the wrong way about LeBron. He complains a lot on the court and off the court, and always feels like he's being victimized when obviously he's had a lot of good things fall in his favor during his NBA career.
Listen, if you take a look at it logically, and I try to do that sometimes. First of all, the MVP, it's quote unquote the most valuable player. It's not the best player. A lot of times it's both, okay? In this instance, Milwaukee does nothing without Giannis. Nothing.
They don't even make the playoffs.
Okay? The Lakers, as great as LeBron is, and believe me, he's still unbelievably great, they still have Anthony Davis on their team. So, if you want to be logical and go from a voting standpoint, I would have gone with Giannis also, to be honest with you. Now, it's really interesting because I saw, I don't know where I saw this, I think last night, and you talk about always, LeBron trying to overtake Michael for championships. Sorry, Michael's always going to be number one in my eye, no matter what. But they're talking about MVP voting. If you go by all the years that Michael was in the league, that LeBron has been in the league, yada, 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 first place votes. And I'll throw some numbers out at you, Mark. Michael Jordan, over all the years that he played, and I think, what was he in the NBA, 13 years, if I'm not mistaken? I think that's right.
15.
Whatever it was. Anyway, he had 36% of first place votes over all the years in MVP voting. LeBron is not even second. Kareem was second at 26.9, then LeBron at 24.4, Bill Russell 23.8, Larry Bird 22.7, obviously all great players, Hall of Famers. And I don't know how much you want to read into that, but Michael beats LeBron in that category too.
You can make an argument. There's so many great players in the history of the NBA. My good friend Kendall Gill feels that Kareem should be the greatest of all time because of everything he accomplished, going back to Power Memorial High School, winning 3 titles at UCLA, and then, of course, I think he won 6 championships in the NBA. So, it just depends on who you enjoyed watching the most, what age you are. I think that has an impact in this, and I think that's why a lot of the younger fans are now building momentum for LeBron. But anyone who saw and experienced Jordan's greatness and who got a chance to enjoy it again on The Last Dance, I think they understand exactly what he did to carry that team to 6 titles.
Listen, MVP voting and awards, winning that trophy, if you will, is pretty cool. But winning championships ultimately is what you're going for, and LeBron is going to get the championship again this year. it's not going to be tainted in my eyes, only because I had the Lakers winning the whole thing even 4 or 5 months ago, to be honest with you. Is it going to be tainted in your eyes?
I thought the Clippers had a really good chance to take him down, but then they just got in their own way. I mean, they were up 3-1 on the Nuggets, and it looked like they had an easy path to get to the Western Conference Finals. And then whatever happened inside the bubble, I have no idea. But, you got some strong personalities on that group. I mean, Kawhi doesn't say much, but he's obviously very strong-willed given the fact that he was on championship teams in San Antonio and Toronto. So he's going to carry a lot of cachet into any locker room he walks into. Paul George seems to be one of the, the big excuse makers in the league, that it's never my fault. He's had a lot of great individual years in terms of statistics, but couldn't get Indiana to the finals. And now, obviously, they fall short with the Clippers. And then, you've got Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell who finished 1-2 and they're 1-3 in the sixth man of the year, and they didn't really come up big at all in this series. So I something has to be going on inside that Clippers organization. We always hear people say, "Oh, Doc Rivers is a great coach, and he's such a great person," and he is a great person. But obviously he's not done the best job with that.
Something's wrong there. And by the way, when we come back after talking to Will Perdue, I'll talk about some rumors involving the Clippers as we go forward. But before we go to break, I was going to run one more thing by you. And last night in the game that Anthony Davis did hit the three-pointer, to his credit, if you go by Denver, and let's face it, this has just been an incredible, I don't even want to call it a coming-out story, because Denver's been good the last couple of years, but I think they've taken even another step this year. In Game 2, of which Davis hit the three-pointer and the Lakers go up 2-0, Jokic and Murray, fantastic, both of them, this whole postseason. They combined for 55. The other three starters only had 16 points, and they only had one other player who was in double-figure scoring off the bench. So Denver is being, sort of revealed a little bit. As good as they've been, they're just not a complete team at this point.
Yeah, things got so desperate for Denver that Mike Malone turned to my guy P.J. Dozier in the fourth quarter. I had a chance to broadcast Windy City Bulls home games last year, and P.J. Dozier, even though he was a member of the Nuggets organization, they didn't have a G League team, so they assigned their players to the Windy City Bulls, and P.J. Dozier is a really good player. He made some plays that really changed the momentum in that game in the fourth quarter. I felt terrible for the kid. He was 1 for 5 from the free throw line, and when you lose by 2, that hurts. But he's going to be in the rotation, I think, going forward. And Gary Harris has been a guy. He, of course, was in that ill-fated Doug McDermott trade. It was Gary Harris and Yusuf Nurkic, which Bulls fans always bemoan. Gary Harris was coming back from an injury. He's been kind of spotty in his playing time. Will Barton, who was their starting 3, has not played at all in these playoffs. And Paul Millsap looks old. So they don't really have a lot other than those two guys.
No, but credit to their organization. And guess who came from that organization?
That's encouraging for Bulls fans, Mr. Karnisovas. And I neglected to mention Michael Porter. And Michael Porter Jr. had a really good game.
He did.
In Game 2. And he's been a little bit erratic in the playoffs, but the kid can score. And, I'm in the camp that a lot of people were. I wish the Bulls would have taken him and gambled on the talent instead of going with Carter that year.
I was going to say, great gamble on the part of Denver. Listen, he dropped because he had the injury, obviously, and they said,
the medical scared a lot of people.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the Bulls. Now, people always want to say, well, the Bulls didn't want to take a risk and all that. Most teams in the NBA were like, we're not touching this guy. That back medical report looks too scary.
Yeah, 6'10" guy with a knee injury, that's a pretty scary proposition.
But he's a player. I mean,
no question.
That fadeaway 3 he hit with the shot clock winding down, that's big time.
No question. All right, let's take a break. We will be back after Will Perdue to talk about some other stuff, but upcoming, the one and only Will Perdue will be back right after this.
On the latest, Buffon 55, John Buffon commented on the Allen Robinson contract situation.
Listen, I have a lot of feelings on this. All of them are negative, and all of them are pointed at the front office. Allen Robinson has been nothing but a sensational professional since coming to the Bears in 2018. And this guy has had Blake Bortles and Mitchell Trubisky as his quarterbacks, and he is still putting up elite numbers. What kind of leverage does Ryan Pace think he has? Well, A-Rob, if you leave, you'll probably get paid more and most likely have a better quarterback. Is that really what you want? Listen, the disrespect that Allen Robinson must feel as Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, they all get paid, and Allen Robinson, the best player on the Bears offense, is currently the 15th highest paid wide receiver in the league and can't get a contract extension. 2017 wasn't that long ago, folks. Remember trying to get excited about Kendall Wright? Marcus Wheaton, Dontrell Inman. This was a franchise so starved for an impact receiver that the fan base was up in arms when they let Cameron Meredith sign with another team. Cameron Meredith. I'll tell you what, if this ends the wrong way and Allen Robinson is either traded or walks in free agency, Ryan Pace is going to lose whatever group of supporters he actually has left. And he isn't the most popular guy with the fans to begin with. But you just won't lose the fans. You're going to lose some of the team. You already see players like Tariq Cohen, Cordero Patterson, Anthony Miller, and rookie Darnell Mooney stepping up on Twitter to voice their support for Allen Robinson. Ryan Pace, if you think you're in a window to win, which I believe you think you are, how in the world do you not get an Allen Robinson deal done? Ryan Pace, do you want to be the smartest and craftiest GM in the league? Find a way to keep your best offensive player. Ryan Pace, do something, because doing nothing has been your biggest problem.
Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show with Alyssa Barbieri, every week on the Barroom Network.
And welcome back to the podcast. I'm David Schuster. He, of course, is Mark Schanowski. And Mark, right now we're joined by a good friend of ours and certainly a man who knows his basketball. And you can follow him on Twitter at Will_Perdue32, the one and only Will Perdue.
Yeah, Will and I had so much fun doing Bulls pre and post for a number of years. And it's always interesting to watch games with former pros and get some of those inside stories, which I'm sure he's going to share some of those with us today. Will, you know, this whole bubble experience has kind of blown my mind. You know, seeing the virtual fans and then the dark shooting backgrounds and the offensive players really seem to love it. What's been your take on this whole thing? I think they've done a great job in pulling this off. First of all, they've done a great job with the health and safety protocols, but just the overall presentation of the product, I think, has been a lot of fun. What's your take on it?
I agree with you, Mark. I was curious what the product was going to be like because of the layoff. You know, these guys all knew that the NBA, because of the amount of money there was to be lost, was going to try to find a way to continue the season, regardless of whether it was just the playoffs, part of the regular season, whatever it may be. So, you know, they had to find a way to continue to work out and somewhat stay in shape. But the quality of the games, for the most part, I really enjoyed. You know, we can pick it apart and talk about the pros and cons, but I think overall it's been a really solid product. I think they've done a nice job of, you know, the virtual fans idea has really gotten the fans involved. I've had a lot of people come up to me, like in Mariano's this morning or in Target or, you know, at a restaurant about how they've just enjoyed watching the games because it's basically basketball at its simplest form because of, you know, the players themselves have to enjoy playing basketball to really succeed in this environment. It's been interesting. I've played in a charity golf outing. I've done a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You know, I know fans don't want to hear this, but I know the players as a whole have enjoyed this, whether it's golfers, whether it's tennis players. They don't get it wrong. They miss the fans. But what they don't miss is the distractions that the fans provide. And there is, as we've noticed, no technically home court advantage.
Sorry, home teams are losing all these games, which shows that it means nothing.
How do you even know who's the home team anymore?
Well, they put the logo on the floor.
I know.
Yeah, but it's been interesting. It's truly just basketball. And this is the interesting thing, Mark, and I'll get your opinion on this. I brought this up in a couple of interviews I've done because of this isolation, because of the bubble. And the families just showing up last week. I think a lot of these teams were put to the test. And I think a team, particularly the Clippers, was exposed because to be truly successful in this setting, in this format, you had to like your teammates. You had to get along with your teammates. You had to respect your teammates.
Hold on there, Will. I mean, we heard you in The Last Dance talking about Michael Jordan's an a-hole and all the rest of this stuff. You don't necessarily have to like all your teammates. I mean, we heard the stories coming out of the bubble about shouting in the Boston Celtics locker room after a particularly tough loss when they fell in overtime. Tell the folks that happens all the time in the NBA, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Every day at practice. Every day. You know, before games, during games, after games. But my point is that this, you know, you have to respect who you're playing with and you have to understand what the goal is. And everybody has to have the common goal and you have to be willing to make the necessary sacrifice to reach that goal. And that's why I say I think the Clippers got exposed a little bit because, when we talk about the teams that were in the bubble, what did we hear stories about? How Luka Doncic was taking his whole team and they were going bowling together and they were bonding and they were working on their relationships. How whenever you saw the Dallas Mavericks throughout the bubble or campus, there were 7, 8, 9 of them at all times. And the reason why I bring up the Clippers, because remember, I think some people have forgotten about this. There were a lot of rumblings coming out of the locker room about how Paul George was treated and how Kawhi was treated compared to everybody else.
So you're saying Lou Williams should have taken him with him for wings at Magic City, right?
Yeah, I think he made a mistake by not bringing wings back then. Or at least bringing back video or something. I don't know. But I just think that that's affected them a little bit because I saw some things, like when I watched those Clippers games, there wasn't the fluidity. There wasn't, you didn't, and it's just my opinion, you didn't necessarily see, what are you seeing right now with the Lakers? When the bench guys are out on the floor and they're playing well, the Lakers guys that are normally the starters that are playing are up off the bench. They're jumping up and down. They're celebrating. You're seeing the same thing, with the Nuggets. You're seeing the same thing with the Celtics, with the Heat, the culture that guys have. And I think that's why this bubble, to me, I've really enjoyed it. It's truly about the game of basketball and what the game can provide. And it's more, to me, it's more than just entertainment. I know a lot of people look at it as just entertainment, but it exposes teams for more than just their weaknesses when it comes to skill and talent.
Hey, Will, I wholeheartedly admit I'm a hoops junkie. I always have been. I always will be. And I could watch basketball. I don't care if they play it in a bubble or on Pluto. It makes no difference to me. I just love the damn sport. And as far as the Lakers go, what I'm seeing out of them, they still have 2 of the best 5 players, if not even more than that.
That helps.
It more than helps. It's ultimately going to win them the championship here. But I want to talk about the series going over in the East, and it's really fascinating. Mark and I both said that series would end up going 7 games, Miami and Boston, because they're pretty even, and I think ultimately that's exactly what will happen. But I want to talk about Jimmy here just for a second, Jimmy Butler, because finally I think he found the home that he was always looking for an NBA where he wanted to ultimately be, and I think he just, feels right down in Miami, and it has nothing to do with South Beach, although that doesn't hurt. But, being one of Pat Riley's guys, and can you just talk about the evolution of Jimmy Butler from here to Minnesota to Philadelphia? It wasn't happening either of those 2 places, but I think he's finally found a home down in Miami.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And listen, for the Bulls fans that are continuing to torment themselves about what could have been, at the end of the day, once they got rid of Tom Thibodeau, the Jimmy Butler experiment was over. Hindsight is 20/20, right? He just didn't get along with Fred Hoiberg. He didn't believe in the system. And this is just my opinion. As I watched him, as you said, David, evolve, he didn't respect Fred. He didn't like the way that Fred treated other players and how easygoing he was. He didn't feel like there was enough discipline within the team and the organization. The best thing that happened to Jimmy Butler was that they traded him. That, at the end of the day, was a win-win. Now, I know a lot of people are like, well, just think if Jimmy Butler was still here. I get that. But because of the animosity that had developed between him and the players that were there and him and management and him and the coaches, it just wasn't going to work. They made a trade. They got some valuable pieces. Unfortunately, they're still trying to figure out how to put those pieces together, but there's still a lot of value there. And as he bounced from Minnesota to Philly, he decided, and he grew up along the way, of what he really needed, what he liked, what he disliked. And he found a home where he's the leader, he's the alpha dog, he's playing with a bunch of young guys that love playing with him. They feed off his energy, they listen to him, and he plays for one of the best, if not the best coach currently in the NBA, when you talk about Eric Spoelstra, and an organization, and Pat Riley, that has developed a culture that he loves, that is basically has his DNA and his footprint all over it, and he is now flourishing. I'll say it. It's unfortunate that it couldn't and didn't happen here in Chicago, but again, to bring us full circle, once they let go of Tom Thibodeau and decided they weren't going to bring in a Thibodeau-type disciple who provided that type of discipline and push Jimmy Butler was no longer going to work in Chicago.
Hey, well, let's talk about the Bulls' current coaching search right now. We've seen reports that they're in the finalist stage, bringing guys in for second interviews, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be very interested in any of the big names on the market like Mike D'Antoni and Billy Donovan. I'm sure the price tag would take them out of the equation. The finalists that I've seen, Wes Unseld Jr., of course, was Mike Malone's assistant in Denver, who knows Arturas very well from being together for a number of years. Darvin Ham from Milwaukee, part of the Mike Budenholzer pop tree. And then Ime Udoka, who's now with the Philadelphia 76ers, but spent 7 years under Pop, learning under one of the best in the business. I got a couple of questions for you here. I've always been of the opinion in the NBA, talent wins. That coaching, I think, is important in terms of structure, culture that you mentioned, and managing egos. But I think, in terms of X's and O's, you can throw that out. The best teams with the best talent are going to win. How important is this coaching decision for Arturas and the Bulls? And you got any intel on these guys? Maybe Udoka or somebody. I don't know if you played with Ime when you were over there. I guess that he was after you. But do you have any intel on these guys, or do you have a favorite you think might be a good fit here in Chicago?
Well, I personally feel just from those guys. Let's just take those three guys you mentioned, and considering what's going on with the Denver Nuggets, I think that in my opinion, I think it's going to come down to Udoka and Unseld Jr. because of what we've seen. Because my understanding is Unseld is responsible for the defense that Denver has developed. I think it was impressive as they got better in each game against the Clippers. Now the question is, can they make the necessary adjustments against the Lakers? But he's done a nice job of putting out a defense that adapts to the personnel that the Nuggets have. So I think that makes him, in my opinion, the favorite at the moment. I think Udoka, because as you talked about the number of years he was under Pop, and yes, he was an assistant with Brett Brown, who was a Greg Popovich disciple. But both those guys, I think, can develop a culture. The reason why now, I used to say I thought Udoka was going to be the best fit, the best guy, but now I'm kind of leaning more towards Unseld. Not Darvin Ham, I don't think would make a good coach, but I just don't know if he has the connections. And the reason why I'm leaning towards Wes Unseld, because in the numerous interviews that I've heard from Arturas, he talks about relationships are key. And as you talked about, Mark, he has a relationship with Wes Unseld Jr., and I think he knows a lot about him. And I think you start taking, you take Arturas, you take Mark Eversley, you take Wes Unseld, and you think, okay, now let's just say Wes Unseld Jr. comes here, and look what Denver's done, especially in the West. You talk about the young talent that the Bulls have. Now they have to develop that culture, but I think there's a respect factor that needs to happen because, unfortunately, Mark, these guys that are currently in the Bulls organization don't understand a winning culture. As good as Zach LaVine is, he's never had a winning record. He's always had significantly more losses than wins, and he's currently the most talented player on this team. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, after a head coach is named, to see this team take a step backwards before it takes a step forward, because the changes probably more mentally than anything else that need to happen to understand truly what it takes to not only just win games, but to turn around the culture of a franchise and bring this franchise back to what it used to be. That takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of commitment, and it takes a lot of sacrifice, not only from the new management that they brought in, but from the new coaching staff that they're going to have and the players. And that requires a lot of self-discipline. I'm not saying these guys don't have it, but I think it's going to require, these guys doing a total 180 from what they're used to doing, how they look at the game, how they look at the approach, and the commitment and the time that they're going to have to put in to make that happen.
Hey, Will, put on your general manager's hat for just a second. And by the way, when you have that GM hat on, that means you have an open checkbook and you take us members of the media out for drinks every now and then. So, but besides all that, obviously Karnisovas will have some options come draft night, which is now going to be in November. He's got that number 4 pick. If you're him, knowing everything that you know about this organization, and I'm sure he's up to speed by now, do you take a player at number 4? Do you look to make trades? I mean, obviously, the guys that potentially could be dealt, we're talking Wendell Carter, we're talking Lauri Markkanen, and we're even talking Zach LaVine. Do you make a big splash right off the bat and look to re-alter the roster? Or do you just sit back and draft somebody at number 4 and just let the thing roll for about a year and then make some changes then?
Well, no, I don't think you just sit back and let it roll. But the thing you do, and I think they're doing this on a daily basis, is you have to have every possible combination figured out. And I think that starts with, okay, you have to put a value on every single player within this team. And how much do you value that player? Meaning, is he a better value on the team, or is he a better value as a trade component? Because what I think this team needs to do is get older. And when I mean older, I don't mean like really older. I mean more experienced. I think they need a solid veteran player that not only can play, but can stay healthy. I liked the trade for Otto Porter Jr. because at the time, Paxson and Gar admitted basically that we're not really going to get any free agents here, so we have to make trades.
Well, this is Chicago, and they said that we can't get free agents. I mean, I think that was really one of the first things that was the beginning of the demise of this front office, to tell your fan base that we know we can't go into the marketplace and compete for free agents. That's a horrible admission for a major market franchise.
Well, it is, but it was also them being honest with themselves, and I liked it. I didn't say that it made me feel good, but at least, at the time they were trying things. What we're hoping now is, Mark, that, with Mark Eversley and with Arturis, and with, Michael Reinsdorf saying, we're $1 billion company and we need to start acting like one.
Did he say that to you? Because I didn't see that in print anywhere.
And they're $3 billion, by the way, not just one.
Well, I haven't seen that in print, but there's a lot of people that apparently have heard him say that, in the sense that, we have to make the necessary changes to right the ship. We can't just stand pat and live on history. We need to make, we need to be more excited about the future. We need to be more excited about moving forward and not continue to live on that statue that's out in, the atrium. We need to make some new history for people to enjoy, because the current fan base, they don't know a lot about that. I mean, very few of them were at those games. They were too young. As I say, my son's 16, almost 17 in November. He didn't get a chance to see me play. He knows me more so because of, he plays NBA 2K with all his friends and watching, The Last Dance and YouTube videos. So they need to make some lasting memories for the current fan base.
Yeah, that would be nice, no question about it. And I know that people who are listening to our podcast and listen on a regular basis are saying, "Come on already, get to the meaty stuff, the juicy stuff with Will from The Last Dance." How many people have come up to you on the street and patted you on the back and said, "I really love the way that you gave it to Jordan," because Jordan has always had this walk on water kind of aura around him, and I think that one of the great things about The Last Dance was it really humanized him. And not to say that it's a bad thing. I mean, the guy was the ultimate competitor, and he could be an SOB to his teammates at times. Did you get a lot of feedback from people who watched The Last Dance saying, "I really appreciated the fact that Will and other people were willing to say that this guy, wasn't maybe as angelic as some of the commercials that would portray him to be"?
Oh, yeah, I got a lot from that. I told people, I said, we're old enough now that it's okay to be honest. It's okay to talk about what it was like playing for him. It wasn't, always an enjoyable experience. But the one thing we always knew, Mark, and you knew this covering him, what his ultimate goal was, and that was to win championships, to be the best player ever. And you had a choice. You either joined in or you got left behind. And usually left behind means traded, or you didn't play, or eventually got cut, whatever it may be. You didn't get re-signed when your contract was end. So you had to ask yourself, was it worth the mental abuse? And that's probably a little too strong of a word, but so people can kind of grasp what we're talking about. Could you take the beating mentally from Michael Jordan? Because it wasn't personal with him, but that's just the approach he took to try to make you a better player, to make you stronger mentally, and to have you help him, win a championship. I still look back on, those days and smile because of what we were able to accomplish. I mean, I did personally. I took a lot of abuse, because of the fact when I first came to Chicago, he's like, well, I don't know much about him, but obviously he wasn't good enough to play in the Big Ten, because he was referring to Purdue University and, instead of, Will Purdue. So I had to change a lot of negative thoughts that he had about me. And that even as a teammate, and he saw me practice every day. He saw how hard I worked and played. It took a while, but I always cherished the fact that a couple of years after he had finished playing and I had finished playing, I saw him on the golf course and we stopped and talked, and, he made a comment and he said, "Hey, we traded the wrong guy." And that meant a lot that he had said that to me, because of what the things that I had tried to accomplish in my time, in Chicago. And I'm not going to sit here and say that one comment made it all worth it, but it's that, the championships, the friendships I made. It was to me, I wouldn't, I always heard people say, oh man, wouldn't you change a few things? Hindsight, yes. But if I was told that this is what's going to happen, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd go through it all again just to get to where I am now.
Yeah, during The Last Dance, they made a big deal of his practice fight with Steve Kerr, and he took a swing at you too, didn't he?
Yeah, so we had a situation where, we were, I think it was in the postseason, and the second unit was running, I think it was Milwaukee Bucks plays, and we were talking about how they're just going to continually run him through screens. So we were having fun at his expense of, the term is laying wood, making sure we hit him. Because Johnny Bach was, he was adamant about that. Even though this is practice, we're not taking it easy on anybody. We want these guys, meaning these guys, the starters, as well as the guys running the opponent's offense, to know what it's going to take, how difficult it's going to be. What's it going to be like for 48 minutes? Johnny Bach was as hardcore as they come. There were no days off. Hey, you're now here at practice. So strap it on, do your best, and compete. Worry about everything else after practice is over. And, I got him a couple times, and he basically just reared up and said, listen, if you do that again, I'm going to punch you. And I didn't think twice about it. And I looked at Johnny Bach, and he just smiled and said, run it again. So we ran the play again. And, BJ took the ball out to half court, and we ran the play. I just ran over. I didn't even set my feet. I ran over. I leveled him, and he got up. I didn't think, and he just immediately took a swing and kind of hit me across the temple. Once I realized what happened and started to go after him, Eddie Neely grabbed me from behind and said, Dad, that's probably not a good idea.
That's the franchise we're talking about. We don't want any fist fights here.
That is right. And, nothing specifically happened that day. It wasn't like Phil pulled him and me in the office and said, all right, we got to work this out. We kept practicing. We cooled off. We went back to what we were doing, and he eventually came back and apologized. I never approached him and asked for an apology. I always thought that this is what it is at this level. This is what it's like playing at the professional level. This is how passionate guys are. These are guys going at each other, regardless of how good one is compared to the other. Guys are competing. And that right there is just an example of what made our team so much better than everybody else.
Hey, Will, those series against the Pistons, those are probably the most intense games maybe ever. The Knicks were pretty close, but the games against the Pistons were just off the charts. So what was it like in those particular series, and how much of a prick was both Mahorn and even more so Lambier?
One of the things I always tell people, I never, ever in my career stepped on the floor thinking that somebody was intentionally trying to hurt me or my teammates. But I always tell people that as the one thing we used to talk about as a team is that, when you play the Pistons, you got to play with no fear. Because when you start to play with a little fear, you start to play a little timid because of the thought of, hey, I might get injured, because the physicality of the nature of this game we're about to play, or this series about to play, you're then a step slow. You're then a little hesitant. And that's usually when you do get hurt, trying not to get hurt. You just basically would step on the floor thinking, all right, I'm going to play as hard as I can. If I happen to get hurt, I hope it's not seriously. I'm not intentionally trying to hurt anybody, but this is just how this particular game or this particular series is going to be played. And we have to figure out how to play not only at their level, but at our level in order to not only compete, but to beat these guys. And we eventually learned that it was more about mental toughness than it was physical toughness, about the ability not to respond. Because when somebody comes at you physically, your normal human reaction is to respond. And we did that way too much early on in those series. And until we finally figured out how to, or should we say, until we understood that our best response was no response at all, which meant our ultimate response would be by beating them and sending them home. And that's the old adage, those who laugh last laugh best. We didn't personally hate those guys. We just hated the way they played. Mm-hmm. And at the time, because you would get distracted by the physicality of the game and the individual, we weren't sitting there thinking, well, this is the only way they can beat us. We were thinking like, these guys are just jerks. Why do they have to play like this? This is totally unnecessary. But that was a form that Chuck Daly had developed because he knew this team lacked certain attributes that were going to help them win championships any other way. And that's why they also became known as the Bad Boys, because the fans fed into it and they fed into the fans, and that's just the identity that they developed. But anybody you talk to that played against them disliked him as well. But then would you play with him? Would you like him on your team? You're like, absolutely. But, the one thing I will say is Lambier took it one step farther, because I ran into Lambier years later in L.A. when I was working for ESPN Radio covering a Celtics Lakers finals, and I ran into him at the lobby of a hotel because the Detroit Sparks were staying there, and he was coaching the Sparks. And we had a brief conversation one evening at the bar, which he actually bought me a beer. But he also said as he left, "I'm sorry, but I still don't like you." But because of the fact that we were such tough competitors and we went at each other, and he took those type of things personally, and he'll carry stuff like that to his grave.
Well, you mentioned the trade that sent you to San Antonio for Dennis Rodman, and people forget you really thrived playing under Greg Popovich. He played the triple towers at times with you and David Robinson and Tim Duncan all on the court at the same time, which was a novel concept, but it obviously worked. You picked up a fourth championship ring playing for the Spurs. Tell the folks what it was like playing for Greg Popovich and being alongside Tim Duncan and David Robinson.
In regards to, Greg Popovich, when I got traded, Mark, the first thing he did was he sat me down. And at the time, remember, he was the general manager, not the coach. Bob Hill was the coach. But he left that legacy, that immediate mark on me by saying, okay, we traded for you for a reason, number one. Number two, the Bulls tried to get us to take other players. We had no interest in other players. We wanted you. Number three, we know what you can do. We've watched you play. We've played against you. We watched plenty of film. But we're going to wipe the slate clean. And over the next 4 weeks, because I got traded the week of training camp, over the next 4 weeks and 8 preseason games, we're going to allow you to prove what you can do. So if you can shoot threes, shoot threes. If you can handle the ball, handle the ball. But we're going to make our assessment and how we feel like we can use you the best to help us win by what you do over the next 4 weeks in practice and the preseason games, because we're going to play you a lot in those games because we feel like this will give you an opportunity to show us who you think you are. And I'd never, not even my college coach, not Phil Jackson, not Doug Collins, I'd never have a coach approach me and tell me that. And that really energized me and gave me an opportunity. I thought I flourished when I was in San Antonio because of that. And the other thing that I think people need to understand is I know they see him now as the crotchety old man that, doesn't like to do interviews during games and is kind of a smart ass to reporters and has become very political because he feels like that's necessary and he has the platform to do so. But I also, really felt like in his heart he cared about every single player, whether he personally liked that player or not, whether he personally felt like that player fit into their system or not, because even after I finished playing there and the numerous meals I'd had with him during my time in San Antonio, the numerous times he invited me into his house to have meals with his, former wife, God bless her soul, who's passed away, but his son and his daughter, and, made me a part of the family. But he made everybody that played there a part of his family. So when you say that Greg Popovich put his family first, he did, but his family was also those players on the roster. But even afterwards, when I would come cover games for ESPN Radio, he would take the time to pull me in his office and, hey, how you doing? And you're like, hey, really good. He goes, no, you'd stop me. You go, no, enough of the pleasantries. How are you really doing? What's going on in your life? How are you? But he also, when we were winning that championship in '99 and my parents were coming to the games, he took the time to stop and talk to my parents and get to know them. And it's just, a lot of people don't think this, but he's a very personable man. He's a very caring man. And somebody that I will always honor and cherish, the time I had in Chicago as well, but probably more so in San Antonio because of the personal touch that he put on the whole process and that culture he developed and pursued in San Antonio with the Spurs.
Hey, Will, nice words, of course, on Pop. He's so revered for so many reasons, basketball and non-basketball. And, he could be crotchety at times, but you know what? People don't understand what he's really all about. So I think you put it very well into perspective. We appreciate you joining us here on the podcast, Mark and I do, and we look forward to seeing you, whether at the United Center or the Advocate Center or anywhere soon. We miss you, buddy.
Well, I miss you guys.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you real soon.
All right, guys. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And we'll be back right after this.
Hey everyone, I'm Chad Gordon.
And I'm Ryan Lieber. We're the hosts of the Friendly Confines podcast.
Each week we'll bring you the latest Cubs news from the fans' perspective. with some of the biggest names in sports.
Joe Buck, welcome to the Friendly Confines with Chad and Ryan.
Yeah, oh my God, I'm happy to do it.
Pat Hughes, welcome to the 7th inning.
Happy to be here, Chad.
It is Len Casper.
You got it, Ryan. Chad, happy to be with you guys.
The Hawk, Andre Dawson.
What a modest team, Craig. I'm doing fine, thank you.
We're also excited to bring you new episodes as part of the Barroom Network.
So if you're a Cubs fan or even just a baseball fan,
be sure to check out the Friendly Confines podcast every week on the Barroom Network.
And welcome back to the podcast. I'm David Schuster. He's Mark Schanowski. And Will once again delivers.
I work with Will for a lot of years, and he is a wealth of knowledge. But sometimes he's a producer's worst nightmare because we got to get to break, Will. But he wants to finish that thought. But no, it's some terrific insight. I love his stories about the Last Dance.
Oh hell yeah!
The glory years with the Bulls. He was very, very candid about his relationship with Michael, his years with Pop, and some good insight on the coaching search. So hope folks enjoyed that. I always love talking to Will.
Yeah, and even though Lambeer bought him a beer, Lambeer's still a prick. I'm sorry. he just is. I'm sorry. It's more than even just him being a thug on the court. Although he was effective. I can't take that away from Bill Lambeer.
And Will made a good distinction in that. You knew the guys who were going to play tough. I mean, we've seen so many clips from the 80s and even going back further where, the clip of Kevin McHale taking Rambis out of the air and stuff. And, the difference was with Lambeer that he had a predetermined mindset that he was going to try to hurt you.
Yeah.
And nobody, these guys are all, this is their livelihoods. This is their careers. I mean, you could get hurt that could affect the rest of your life. And I honestly think that for Bill Lambeer, he didn't care one bit. He was out there to hurt people.
And he didn't care who it was. I mean, he took on Michael Jordan, who was the best there ever was. He also, one time, I remember, went after Larry Bird, and Bird went back after him. Mm-hmm. I mean, so, yeah, Lambeer, I'll just say it again, he was a prick. All right, anyway, let's move on to the Bulls. And one thing that Will talked about, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, I think it will come down to Udoka or Unseld Jr. I think one of these two guys maybe very shortly will be named the Bulls head coach.
Well, when you look at their connections, obviously that Mark Eversley was in Philadelphia this past year where Udoka was on the bench. And then Arturis knows Wes Unseld Jr. extremely well. I believe that he was there for the whole time that Unseld Jr. was an assistant coach for the Denver Nuggets. So, Unseld Jr., obviously, his dad was an NBA executive and coach and a great player, Hall of Fame player. He knows the ins and outs of the league. Udoka had a very wide-ranging experience as a player, played on a lot of good teams, played overseas. There's been a chance to coach under Greg Popovich. He's got a good background. These guys are ready. There's no question they're ready. I know some Bulls fans are a little bit wary. Well, why? There's these big-name guys out there. Why would you hire a career assistant? You've got a first-time head of basketball operations. I think that he wants to kind of set his own course. I don't think he wants to bring in a retread coach. I think we'll see him hire one of the top assistants and then try to build a winning culture in Chicago.
All right. Usually on our last segment, I've come up with, over the last couple of podcasts that we've done, some really crazy trade rumors, in regards to the
they're
Bulls.
all ridiculous, too.
They are. In the last couple of weeks, I don't even know what website they were from. So, that's why we poo-pooed them. But I have one today that's from the Bleacher Report, which is usually, a little bit further up the totem pole. And I'm going to shoot it down in advance, but I'll just tell you what it is. All right, the Bulls in Detroit in a trade. Okay, now Detroit.
You getting Derrick Rose back?
What, dude? You reading my notes here?
No, but I figured if you're going to contrive a trade, you might as well send Derrick Rose back to Chicago.
Well, it's not my trade rumor; it's theirs. But anyway, all right, here we go, and you can shoot it down. Chandler Hutchinson, Luke Cornett, and the number 4 overall pick to Detroit for D Rose and the number 7 pick.
I'd do that.
I think I would do that one too.
I'd
come
do that.
To think of it.
I mean, Derrick Rose has reinvented himself, and he's a very, very effective player. Now, the one thing that I think you'd have to be a little bit wary of, who's starting
at the small forward?
No. Okay. Just with Derrick Rose
Kobe
coming
White.
in. They've kind of anointed Kobe White as a starter. I know it's a new front office, new coaching staff, so all jobs are going to have to be won going forward. But that could be an interesting dynamic if you brought Derek back. Would he retard the progress of Kobe White?
Well, he might actually help him to a degree because, listen, Kobe White, and we're going to talk about him in just a second here, I just don't think he's a natural point guard. He's a natural scorer, no question about that. And in today's NBA, I know you will argue that, the game has changed, which it has, and, a lot of point guards are actually scorers first and then, facilitators even after that. But I think Derrick Rose, who has been in the in the running for sixth man of the year now a couple of times, could actually be that sixth man of the year and play the point guard in a backup role, if you will, and still play 25 to 28 to 30 minutes a game without retarding the growth of Kobe White. So actually,
I do that trade, and I would take Isaac Okoro, who's my guy, at 7. And then he's your small forward.
And since this this draft, as we both have talked numerous times, is really numbers 1 through 3, and then it sort of slides off. Really, at number 7, as opposed to number 4, it might not be that much of a drop. So yeah, and I think we could survive without Luke Cornett going forward.
Yeah, I think we'd be okay.
Chandler Hutchinson's an interesting case, though. Also, I mean, again, in the 12 games after he played with, after the injury,
he did well.
He showed you what he can do. I mean, he can be explosive going to the basket. You just worry about all the injuries he's had.
And he's a really good kid. I had a chance to talk to him at length, and I really like Chandler Hutchison. Sometimes I think when people have a series of injuries, when athletes have a series of injuries, people think that's their fault. And it's not. This is a high-stress kind of occupation. You're going to have injuries, and unfortunately, he's had a lot early in his career. I think if he could stay healthy, which is a big if, I think he's got an NBA future.
The only thing is, they don't really have depth at the wing position, unfortunately. No. You can talk about Zach LaVine, but no, Zach LaVine is still a two-guard in my estimation. And Otto Porter Jr., he's only here for one more year. I can promise you he will not be a Bull after the next season, unless he's going to play for free, and he's not going to do that. I mean, he's just too expensive and too injury-prone. So ultimately, the Bulls are going to have to find somebody else to play that wing position, if indeed Chandler Hutchison is not on the roster.
And this is just going to be an evaluation kind of process. Obviously, as we speak, the Bulls are holding team workouts at the Advocate Center. They're going to get a chance to have some intra-squad scrimmages. I think Otto Porter's even there. I thought there was a lot of speculation that he might not show up because of his contract status and the fact that he doesn't really need to be there because his long-term future isn't with the Bulls. But, these guys are going to want to impress Arturas and the front office. Obviously, Chris Fleming is running the workouts, who was an assistant coach, but he has 2 more years left on his contract, so he's still there, and Roy Rogers still has 2 more years left on his deal. So a lot of decisions to be made, and I think it's great for the front office. They can get a chance to watch these guys, even though it's not against another team. I can imagine that these intra-squad scrimmages will be pretty competitive because everyone's going to want to impress the new front office.
100%. First of all, how could Otto Porter not show up? He's getting paid $28 million. Oh, I'm not going to show up. I'm underpaid.
Well, you can always say that, play the COVID card and say, I'm worried about the health and safety issue.
If everybody else is there, he has to be there too. And if he doesn't show up and he's the one guy who doesn't show up, the word spreads very quickly around the league.
Yeah, I mean, I have not heard any reports that anyone's missing.
All right, anyway, we're jumping to a bad tangent here. Let's talk real quickly about Kobe White. Kobe White has gone on record a couple of times now over the last few days. I am a point guard. Now, listen, when I was doing the games last year, on the score, the pre and the post games, it was myself and Bill Winnington against Chuck Swirsky. Swirsky said he could be a point guard. Basically the two of us, Whittington and myself, we kept looking at each other and saying, I know the game has changed, and we've talked about this numerous times. I just don't know, honestly, if I want him to be a point guard because, A, he is a natural scorer. I think there's a role in that for a guy like that in this league. And his turnover to assist ratio was not good. So I still don't know if he can be a point guard.
Yeah, and we have talked about this, so I'll go back to my
I know. The game has changed.
You don't need that guy to bring the ball up and hold his fingers up and call a play out for everybody. The game's just not played that way anymore.
I'm so old and so old-fashioned, I admit it.
We've just seen so many teams now that are playing multiple guards at the same time. I don't think you have to have a de facto point guard. I think you can have a number of players who can handle the ball, who can initiate offense, and I don't think it has to be just the one guy.
All right, it doesn't make a difference because Derrick Rose is coming back here anyway, according to Bleacher
Hey,
Report.
I'd make that trade. I'd make that deal.
Do you think Derrick would want to come back here? By
Yes,
the way, I talked about the Clippers and a trade rumor. There's also a trade rumor that the Clippers want Derrick Rose themselves. So they might be involved.
They could use Derrick Rose.
And listen, he would love it. He loves Los Angeles.
Yeah.
He's got a home out there anyway. And to play under Doc Rivers, I think that would be a dream for Derrick Rose.
Well, there's also a lot of teams are lining up trying to get Drew Holiday away from the Pelicans because he's got 1 year left on his deal, and they've got a lot of young players and a lot of contractual things they're going to have to deal with, and they may not want to pay Drew Holiday a max deal going forward. So he's a guy that could be out there. We talked about Chris Paul last week. He could be a guy that Milwaukee goes after to try to convince Giannis to sign long term. So there's going to be guys that are going to be in play for trades this year. That's why I've said repeatedly, if there's an opportunity out there where you can parlay the 4 pick and one of your young guys and maybe get a star at a lower price, I'd say go for it.
So do I, 100%. We'll be back with more trade rumors next week. Some might be a little bit better than others, of course. Hey, Mark, it's been fun as always.
Yeah, it was good talking to Will, good catching up, and we'll see if we have a finals matchup by next week.
You got it. All right, take care, everybody.
Hey everyone, it's Aldo Gandia, and if you know someone who is a passionate Chicago Bears fan, then you need to tell them to subscribe to the Bears Barroom Radio Network. We've got shows almost every day of the week, and they are shows by passionate sportscasters and fanalists. Bears Barroom Radio Network, your podcast network for the Chicago Bears.